having had a son that nearly died, I understand that quote that he who has his health has 1,000 dreams and he who doesn't has one. It really is. So what's that first step that you can take in your health? And if you aren't getting the 8,000 steps in a day, well, there's the first one. Got that? Then do the protein. Got that? Then do the resistance training. And you just build on that foundation of all of these majors, the 80% that are going to really be those big rocks.
This is the Home of Healthspan podcast, where we profile health and wellness role models, sharing their stories and the tools, practices, and routines they use to live a lively life. JJ Virgin, it is great to be back with you, this time not sweaty, doing 10 minutes of exercise snacks, which I'm sure we will get to. But before we dive in for the audience on everything you are, everything you do, everything you have done, how would you describe yourself?
I'm a lively mom and wife and dog mom too, and a nutrition expert, fitness Hall of Famer, and New York Times bestselling author.
Just a few things in there, just a few things. So there will be a lot to unpack, and I know the audience is going to be very excited to hear from you. So I do want to go back to the amazing Eudaimonia Summit where we were together, and you did numerous different sessions, but the one that I was able to enjoy and participate in was this idea of exercise snacks. Can you please, for our audience, describe what they are and their benefit? I mean, you had some pretty good data and research on the impact of them that I think will surprise a lot of people.
I know, it's wild, isn't it? Well, it actually started for me years ago when this was like 25 years ago or maybe 30 in grad school. A study showed up, and the study was comparing 3 times a day, 10 minutes of exercise bouts versus 30 minutes a day. And what they discovered was the people who did 3 times 10 had better results than the 30-minute people. I remember at the time, the thinking was, well, because that was back in the days that you will not remember, but way back when the predominant belief was that if you couldn't work out for at least 30 minutes, ideally 60, and everything was focused on cardio, aerobic training, you shouldn't bother because you had to get into your fat burning zone. And if you didn't get in your fat burning zone, it wasn't worth it. Like, how ridiculous. So there was this little study that said 3 times 10 versus 30, and the 3 times 10 beat the 30, and everyone was like, what is going on? And I remember at the time, people were like, well, that means like they either could do 30 or not, versus at least they got one 10-minute in piece. And I thought, well, what if it was just that if you knew you were only going to do a short amount of time, you actually will make sure you do it, you're more compliant, and you do it harder. So that was kind of the head scratcher for me. All these years, I was trying to find the data on this. And then this whole idea of exercise snacks came to the surface. And a couple months before Eudaimonia, when they asked me to teach an exercise class, and I thought, well, geez, I have not taught an exercise class for a good 25 years, but this will be fun. I'll do it. I thought, what do I want to teach? And they go, we have no equipment. I'm like, all right, no equipment. And, and everyone will be coming in at different levels. And my biggest goal was I wanted people to walk out with something actionable they could use again and again. Like you going in to do an exercise class for 15 minutes or an hour and then never doing it again, who cares? But if I could, with an hour class, give you something that you could do now every day that could change your life, hey, we're on to something. And that's what this was set up to do. There's this concept called VILPA, Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity. Now, I'm a little obsessed with high-intensity interval training and high-intensity functional training, and that is where you go all out for anywhere from 10 seconds to 4 minutes, and then you recover and you repeat. And what we know about that type of exercise, when you do short bursts that are really hard, is that you drive up the lactate, which then can become a fuel source for your heart and brain. So it's really good for you. It drives down visceral fat. It teaches your sympathetic nervous system how to handle stress better. And you actually fit stuff in and get a little metabolic boost where you create some oxygen debt that your body now has to pay back. There was a study that came out that showed that this VILPA, this vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, 10 minutes total a day done in 1 to 2 minute bursts, that if you did this every day, as opposed to people who didn't, you reduced your all-cause mortality by anywhere from 40 to 50%. And if you were a slacker and you just did 4.5 minutes a day, you reduce your all-cause mortality by 28%. And I think to myself, when I read this, I'm thinking, well, what's the biggest reason people don't exercise? Now, since I've done this for 40 years, I can tell you the two biggest reasons. Number one, what do you think it is?
Time, and it's uncomfortable.
It's time, and I don't want to go to the gym.
Okay.
It's the kind of thing where I'm too out of shape to go to the gym. And you're like, well, wait a minute. So don't want to go to the gym, don't have time. This takes care of both of those things. So that's what I was putting together at Eudaimonia, was using this research that showed that these 1 to 2 minute bursts, now I pushed it a little bit, I took them to 3.5 minutes. These bursts done throughout the day can have this dramatic impact on your health, on reducing your risk of death, right? And I would also argue, done in the way that we did them, which is high intensity functional training, where we were doing things, I like to say, you train to get better at life, you don't train to get better at training. So we're doing things that mimic what you'd have to do in life, right? So when you do those types of things, you're going to get stronger, you're going to handle stress better, you're going to burn off that visceral adipose tissue. So that's what we did at Eudaimonia, was this concept of exercise snacks. And again, whatever your fitness level, the cool thing with high intensity interval training is it's relative to you. So for someone, high intensity interval training may be 20 air squats.
Right.
It might be walking up the stairs. It doesn't matter. And it never gets easier. You just make it harder. Like I had someone tell me, oh, I've been doing your HIIT training. And I was doing, 1 minute bursts, but I got so much stronger. I'm doing 4 minute bursts. I go, no, you just make it harder.
Yeah. You need to burst more during that minute.
You miss the plot,
Yeah. I love two things about that. I mean, one, anyone curious for ideas for these snacks, JJ wrote them up and I posted them on Instagram. So you can see the individual circuits as well as a long list of all the different exercises that she shared with us and suggested, including some stretching at the end, because flexibility is certainly
well. But there was a reason I did that way, and that was really interesting. And I credit Gabby Reese for this. When she told me this, I'm like, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. It actually wasn't stretching. It's kind of interesting. The research on stretching is not that great.
Okay.
I still look at people and they're like stretching before they work out. There's no evidence that stretching before you work out does anything. In fact, it might be detrimental. What I've always found is that if you move through full ranges of motion, it's going to be better for hypertrophy anyway, but it's also going to be, it's mimicking more of your daily life. What I put at the end was balance.
Right. That's right.
And the reason I put balance in, when you look at, how do we have the best aging? How do we make sure that what we're doing now is going to let us do the cool stuff we want to be able to do in our 70s and 80s? And balance is a big thing that we lose. And so what Gabby Reese told me, she goes, I train balance after I'm exhausted, because that's when people get hurt. Most people don't trip and fall when they're like, at their peak. They trip and fall when they're tired. They've got too much in their hands or whatever. So at the end of doing those bursts, which of course we did 4 different high intensity functional training bursts. They were between like 2 and 3 minutes each. And we did 2 rounds of each of them. So this was basically a HIIT class, right? But I taught snacks so you could take them home with you. But then after that, we did our balance training. And it was fun because, I was falling over. I was like, you're going to fall over. It's okay.
Pushing. Yeah. The other thing, and I think this is going to be a common theme in our conversation, just from what I know about you, is that Pareto principle, right? Of it's not you have to do everything. It's actually you get 80% of the benefit from that first 20%. So my own personal experience, as I was a D1 All-American athlete on the national team, and what I took to train and be a D1 athlete, where we were going 11 practices, 12 practices a week, plus dry land, weights, everything, hours and hours. I took 2 years off and then went to the UK and competed. And we would do 3 to 4 practices a week for like 45 minutes. And my 200-meter time was within 2 seconds of what it took me to be an All-American. And you realize 90% of the effort when you're competing at that level is for that last incremental bit, because that matters.
Mm-hmm.
But for life, getting that 80% benefit, whether it's how we approach nutrition or sleep or over optimizing, is probably not how we want to live day to day. If you are a professional athlete, yes, like you want to squeeze out every single drop and put it in. But for most people listening to this, we're not. It's how do I live the life that I'm aspiring to, right?
Yeah, which is great, because here's the reality. That 20% is why most people don't want to do it. It removes all the fun and joy and everything else out of it. And what I find with a lot of people is they missed, in the 80% is the majors. It's the things that will really move the needle, that make the big difference. But what I find with a lot of people is they skip past that and they're looking for some fun thing. Maybe it's the red light or the supplement I was like, those are cool. But those are, when you're going to buy the car, what's the upholstery?
Right.
Those are not the engine or the battery, right?
Selecting the quality of speakers to pop into it versus like what's actually moving you from A to B.
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned, so we talked a lot about the exercise snacks, and that was one, they're super beneficial. Anybody can access. You can do it in the office. You can do it at, like, just hands up, on airplanes now. Every 60 minutes, I go to the bathroom and I do 20 squats in the bathroom, because I used to do them in the middle of the aisle and people kind of freak out. But
now they probably wouldn't freak out, though. Now they think you're super cool. I know. Yeah. I drink a lot of sparkling water on the plane, so I'm always up and down. Like I have to sit in the aisle because I'm like back and forth.
Yeah. But that's kind of working around set circumstances. Now, I know how big you are on muscle and strength. And you said, hey, this was a situation because we didn't have access to equipment. For someone who is looking maybe to build their home equipment, like what's your go-to at-home equipment that people can access? And what does your own kind of week-to-week fitness regimen look like?
So I have a really cool gym at home, I will admit. However, it's interesting. I take it in a matter of degrees. At the very minimum, get a TRX. I think this is one of the most underrated things, the segmental trainers that use your body weight, but also leverage so that you can make it harder. So a TRX you can get for around $100. And all of a sudden you can do pulling exercises, pushing exercises, squats, jumping, etc. So that's kind of my, let's at least get that. If we can step up from that, dumbbells and a bench or a big exercise ball that you can use as a bench are my next step for that. Because ultimately, what we want to be able to do, even though the research now has come out showing that you can build muscle the same if you're using machines versus using free weights. While that is true, or appears to be true, what's also true is that we are not bolted to the floor. And, right? And when you think about it, I'm not training to be able to do a leg press better. I'm training to be able to get off the toilet, get out of a small car, pick up heavy stuff. And that's very different. And so if someone's got a lot of injuries, they're unsure, machines can be a great place to start. But ideally, I really like to use cables and free weight and body weight, because it's going to make your nervous system has to pull in a lot more. You have to use a lot more stabilizer muscles. And those are the things that matter when we're having to move quickly, get out of the way of something, pick something up fast. We tend to lose as we age, right? We lose muscle starting around age 30. It's 3 to 8% per decade, so up to 1% a year. But it's 2 to 3 times more that we lose strength and 4 to 6 times more that we lose power. So I always look at how can I make sure that I'm incorporating as much of that in, along with balance and flexibility and agility, so that we have it all. So the good news about that is, that means we can do a lot of this stuff at home if we have heavy enough dumbbells, right, to be able to do it. And you start easy, maybe 5, 10, 15 if you're a woman, and then get more as you progress, because things should never get easier. You just keep getting stronger.
That makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of kind of week to week, your schedule, do you get most of your zone 4 through high intensity interval resistance training? And then do you focus on zone 2 at all?
I don't do zone 2 really.
Okay.
Every once in a while. Here's what I do. And this is my progression for every human, right? So this is the way I think about this is the first thing that I want to make sure that we're doing is actually moving more. To me, moving more is like brushing your teeth, right? Really getting in and when you look at all of that research of the sweet spot of how many steps per day, it really seems to be around 7,500, 8,000. Now, that is the floor. That's the minimum, right? But if someone's coming to me and they're starting, and I literally had this happen, I had someone who was doing the average American is getting in 3,000 steps a day, and someone who came to me was getting 2,500 steps a day in. So before I start doing any of the other stuff, I'm like, let's get you actually getting in, hitting that 8,000 steps a day. So that's my first part. Once they're doing that, what I love to do next is add in a little intensity. And the easiest, best way to do that to me is to add in a rucking vest. I think rucking vests are the best thing ever because, especially for women, this is loading your hips, right? So it's great for bone mineral density, and it's an easy way to add some intensity. I moved to Florida, so we don't have hills. So unless I want to go walk up and down a bridge, I got no hills, but a rucking vest works out perfectly for that. And I can increase the intensity. So it's simple. So that's an easy one. And when you think about it, if you are 40 plus, you've rucked in your life because you used to have to carry books to school. So, you had a backpack, you had books, that was rucking. So we've all rucked. So we're just going to do some rucking. Once you do that, the next thing that I add in is resistance training. And when I think of resistance training, I divide the body into 4 and I focus on 3. So upper body pushing, things like a push-up, an overhead press. I particularly love overhead presses because they load the spine and they mimic me in the airplane because I put so much in my carry-on, right? So, it's like I always look at weigh my other suitcases and go, overweight. So everything gets into the carry-on. So my carry-on can be like 70 pounds and I'm going to be hoisting that into the overhead. So, this is really mimicking normal life. A dip's another one, pushing yourself out of a chair. Upper body pulling are things like a pull-up, a pull-down, an overhead press, a bent over row. I love bent over rows because you're picking something off the floor, just like a deadlift. And then hips and thighs, things like squats, step ups, deadlifts. Bonus points for adding in some jumping into that, right? Jumping up onto a box or jumping after an air squat. And then there's power core crunches and things like that. But truthfully, if you're doing deadlifts and squats and you're doing push-ups, you're doing it. So that's what I always look at is I never in my life, I can't think of a reason I would ever need to be really good at crunches. Like, what's that doing for me?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. Going back to the benefit of the free weights versus the machine of having to work those stability muscles, you're getting a twofer with a lot of those other exercises.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I'm always looking for. Like, how do I get as much in as possible? So I do that. And for hypertrophy, if someone, the cool news is if you're new to resistance training, it doesn't take much to start to get stronger. And if you've been doing resistance training for a long time, it doesn't take much to maintain your results. It does take to push past where you are. So, basically kind of my bare minimum is to do 2 days a week of each of those different body parts and get in 20 to 30 sets of each body part. So maybe I'm doing pushing and overhead push-ups and overhead presses twice a week. And I'm going to make sure that I get in at least 10 sets twice a week. So that's the first thing. I tend to do things more like 3 times a week because I'm still trying to put on muscle. Like my goal is to pack on as much muscle as I possibly can. This is my 401k. It's like my physical 401k, right? And, once you get to a certain point, you have to keep progressing in order to put on muscle with volume. So I'm either going to do more weight, more reps, more sets, right? Another exercise, but you got to do something. So once you've got that going, the next thing I add in is high intensity interval training. And so I do that on, 2 to 3 times a week. I'll put that in and I vary that up depending on what I'm feeling like that day. Sometimes I'll do the horrific Norwegian 4x4, which is 4 minutes of relatively like what you could do hard as possible for 4 minutes. Then you back it down and go easy for 3 and do it again. And you do 4 circuits of that. And that's really to drive lactate up because your body
Yeah.
can use that as a fuel source for your energy, for your brain and your heart. So it's really good for mitochondrial biogenesis, for getting new mitochondria going. And then 1 day a week when I'm home, I should really do this when I travel too, but I use it as a scapegoat excuse. I admit it. 1 day a week when I'm home, I go to yoga. I hate yoga. And I always say in my next life, I'm going to be a yogi, but it is, I think for people 40 plus, resistance training is the most important, and then HIIT training, but yoga is right there with it because it makes you do crazy balance stuff that you would never typically do. And I'm so competitive and I go to a class with 25-year-olds. So
Yeah, but the funny thing, like being an athlete and you go in the class, there's a 62-year-old could just totally own you, right? Because she knows her body so well. She's been doing it. So like you think you're so strong and you're like, I can't do half of what
you
she
get your
does.
butt kicked in a yoga class
Yeah.
by
Yeah. It really, it's a different skill set. They came in my senior year. The squash teachers had a background in yoga and taught us, and everybody loved it. Everybody started doing yoga thereafter. It was like, oh my God,
wow.
this just opens up so much that I didn't know was there. It became a real hit with the team. Yeah, I'm actually doing I do a 5x4 because if 4x4 is good, I just figure like I need the fifth one just to do that
Oh
extra one.
boy, more is more.
Doing it today.
Overachiever.
I'll mix like swimming some days on it, or the rower, or a salt bike. A salt bike's one of my favorites to do it.
Yeah, I got a sprint treadmill, and that's my love hate.
Yeah.
My sprint treadmill.
Yeah. No, so you touched on muscle, right? And it's incredibly, like you said, your 401k insurance policy. As we age, we're losing 1%. We really need to invest in it. Put investment in the bank, that muscle bank. And it's not just the work we do; we have to fuel it. So I know a big thing for you is protein intake, and so I'd be curious your whole nutritional approach personally. Like we can start with protein, but I'd love to kind of hear the overall how you think about nutrition on that 80-20 probably again.
Yeah. When you think about everything we're doing is to build resilience because, we live in a really bizarro world that is not built for our biology, really. We're kind of living against a lot of the ways our body should live. And so we're building for resiliency. So when I think about nutrition, I always start again, macro to micro. So the very first thing is I had a great nutrition mentor early on, and he was like, add before you take away. Because quite often, like I worked in weight loss for years, and people would literally come to me for their first visit. And I always had them do a couple days of a diet recall before they came in. And it would be a horrific thing to see because it was basically like they felt like when they saw me, I was going to take all these things away. So they wanted to eat all the things, clear out their pantry, et cetera, right? And they'd come in and I'm like going, I'm not going to take anything away actually to start. I'm going to have you start to focus on some things and crowd out the bad. And so the very first thing that I like to do is have people first do a macro audit. So just for a week or two, just actually track what you're eating and not just track it with an app, but track it with an app and a food scale. Because we know we underestimate what we eat by 20 to 40%, even the dietitians do. And so you've got to weigh it in. So that's the first place I start with people is just getting them curious. And what's so interesting with that is even without any instruction, just having someone do that, they'll start to make shifts because they'll go, oh my gosh, I had no idea, right? So that's step one. Then I'm going to start to optimize protein. So next step, and the reason that I have people do this, yes, you need protein to fuel muscle protein synthesis, to build muscle, but that's not actually the reason I'm doing it first. The reason that I'm having people eat protein first is because when they do, protein is the most satiating of the three macronutrients. Where we have protein is really, I call it our function macro. It's going to help us rebuild, renew, regenerate. Fat and carbs are energy macros that we are going to use for fuel sources. And so the first thing I have you do is eat protein. When you're eating protein, it requires about 20 to 30% of its calories in the digestion and assimilation process. Contrast that with basically nothing for fat and about 5 to 10% of the calories for carbs. So first thing is eating protein first. If all you did was take some of the calories away from fat and carbs and put them over in protein, that in itself is going to result in some fat loss. Then we know protein is more satiating and satisfying. And I say both those words because we know it's satiating. It slows down stomach emptying. It triggers GLP-1s, right? But it's also satisfying because those amino acids are how we're making those brain chemicals like dopamine and serotonin that tell us, hey, you're cool. So satiating and satisfying. People who eat protein first tend to make better food choices overall. It's good for blood sugar control. I know there's all this out there that we should be having veggies first for that. But there's a reason that I'm having people do this first because it is more satiating and you'll still get that blood sugar control. So that's where I start is let's just eat the protein first. Now, if you're eating animal-based products, you're going to get some fats with that too. And that's why it's important that you are what you eat, that you're eating clean because it's generally the fat in the animal where you're going to get the problems because that's where the toxins go. So this is why we want to eat as clean as possible so we're not getting a bunch of pesticides, herbicides, hormones, antibiotics that would be stored in the fat. But all of this stuff gets counted in that app. The next thing that I have people do after that is focus on non-starchy vegetables. I've divided the plate for me as protein, fat, non-starchy vegetables, and then it's starchy carbs and fruit. I've never really understood why we put fruits and vegetables together. If you put fruit and vegetables together, people will eat potatoes and apple juice, right?
Yeah, that would be said. Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's the reality. So you cannot say, broccoli is the same as a potato, is the same as apple juice. It's just ridiculous. So I put non-starchy vegetables next with the goal of getting 5 or more servings a day, like really 10 or more, with a lot of diversity in that, where you want to have like as many different types of vegetables and colors so you get the different polyphenols, which then help your gut microbiome have more diversity, which is everything for your health. So that's the next phase. And I figure with most of us, when we make vegetables, we're probably using a little fat there too. So between those things, I find most of us generally between our protein and our non-starchy vegetables probably have gotten enough fat, especially women, because while I focus more on macronutrients and what we're getting, you can't completely count out calories. You eat too much healthy food, you're going to, have too many calories. They got to go somewhere and they're going to be stored, right? So after that, I get into a little bit of fruit, generally like a couple cups of berries. And then depending on what you've got going on, starchy carbs, things like potatoes, winter squashes, root vegetables, legumes, etc. So, that's the basic thing. How many carbs and how much fat, which is the end old question and the big debate out there and will always be. There is actually I haven't seen any research to show that for a weight loss diet, one is superior to the other. I think it really depends on the person and how they feel best. Someone who's got more insulin resistance coming in probably is going to do better on a higher fat, lower carb diet. Someone who's got more adrenal exhaustion is more of an athlete is going to do probably better on a higher carb, lower fat diet. But it's like, what do you like? What feels good? What works for you? Right.
Yeah. It's similar, I think, with nutrition and fitness and all these others of there's not an objective right answer. And if you don't say, oh, I hate running, so I hate exercise. Like, no, you just hate running. There are infinite varieties. Like, oh, I don't like asparagus, so I hate vegetables. Like, no, you don't like asparagus. Like, go find the stuff you do like. Just there's an infinite number of plants. Go play with them. Yeah.
Yep. There's all sorts of ways to get there, right?
Yeah. And I know we talked about like majoring in the majors, not the minors, but with thinking about the plate and everything that goes into it, do you find you still need or want to supplement anything? Magnesium because of soil quality, or vitamin D, or adding a protein powder because you're not sure you're getting enough in the
Oh, I love
meals?
supplements. I
Okay.
love supplements. Love, love, love supplements. So my kind of foundational supplements are magnesium, like you talked about, fish oil, but this also depends. I think it's important for someone to take an omega-3 index test. I'll tell you, it was interesting. I take generally 1 or 2 grams of fish oil a day. I eat fish 3 to 4 times a week. I take my omega-3 index. You want to have your omega-6 to omega-3 about 4 to 1. This is what they think we ancestrally used to do. It keeps your inflammation in check. You don't want to be like people talk about omega-6 as being inflammatory. You want the balance. Like you don't want too much of one or the other. You don't want to be too pro-inflammatory. You don't want to be too anti-inflammatory. Too anti-inflammatory, you get, stuck with a needle, you'll bleed out. So I took my omega-3 index a couple months ago. I was like, oops, I was 2 to 1 because I just tend to eat a lot of grass-fed, grass-finished meat and seafood and, supplement with fish oil. So I was like, I really actually probably don't need to supplement with fish oil. So this is where testing can be really important for omega-3s and it will also show you if you've been like eating a bunch of crappy oils, it'll show up there. And then I also think it's important for your vitamin D. So I take a D3K2 product and I keep my vitamin D around 70, 80. So I like it 50 to 80 NGs per ml. But you want to make sure you're in the right range, right? This is really a pro hormone. It's called a vitamin. It's really much more of a pro hormone. So you should test for that one too. And all the good lab companies now, these easy things to do. So those are my foundationals, plus the other foundational for me is creatine. And especially like if I look back in my life, I wish I'd started taking this when I was a teen. I started lifting weights when I was a teenager. I started, taking people to Gold's Gym in Venice in my 20s. And I think that's why I didn't take any creatine. I was lifting weights with the high school football team because the girls didn't have a weight room. And I was going to Gold's Gym in Venice, which was the mecca of bodybuilding. And all the dudes took creatine. And so I thought it was like this anabolic, thing. And I'm like, I'm not touching that. Right. And now come to find out that this is probably one of the most important supplements for longevity, for great health, because it's going to help you have more energy in your cells. Creatine.
Mental as well as
Oh,
physical, right?
huge.
Yeah.
So 80% of creatine's in your muscles, 20% in your brain. And so it's amazing for focus, for sleep deprivation, for jet lag, for mood, for depression. I've got a friend now using the type of creatine I HCl for a really cool dementia study. I mean, it's amazing. There's going to be so much more coming out about it. So it doesn't build muscle per se. It allows you to work out harder and recover faster. It gives your brain and body great energy, which then is going to allow you to do more. And when you do more, then you can build more muscle, put more stress on your bones, which is fantastic. It's also great for your skin. So skin wrinkling, mood. When I've been doing a lot of travel around the world, and so I use it for jet lag. It's amazing.
And I mean, in terms of bang for your buck cost efficiency, right? So you talked about in high school, it certainly had that image. And my mom, as a physician at that time in the 90s, they're saying, oh, it might mess with your kidneys or all these potential, but now it's probably the longest researched supplement and there aren't really negative side effects. Like it's just a base of, you should just be taking it.
There's no it is so interesting because you'll hear hair, kidneys. Trying to think if there's any other ones. So here's the reality with it. Creatine is the most studied supplement. You will hear you should take creatine monohydrate because it's been the most studied, which is sort of like you should not have an iPhone. You should only have a rotary phone because it's been around the longest. It's the creatine that's making the difference, not the carrier. Turns out the creatine monohydrate is not a great carrier for creatine because about 85% of it is is extracellular. So it's causing gas, bloating. In fact, 76% of women using creatine monohydrate expressed that they got bloated from it. Contrast that with creatine HCl, which is 100% absorbed into the bloodstream. And so you can use a seventh of the dose to get the same effect. So it's same price wise, but you don't get any of the bloating that you hear because you want the intracellular fluid that you can get from creatine, but you don't want the extracellular, the bloaty part of it. So that's the cool thing with the differences in creatine. But it's still creatine, all the creatine benefits are creatine, not the carrier. You want to choose the carrier that you feel good on. Some people do fine on monohydrate, so great, use monohydrate. But for a lot of women, as I started recommending it, they were like, I don't like the way I feel. And I'm like, you can get through it. No, they aren't going to get through it. Women don't do that. So that's where HCl can be great because you won't experience those things that you might feel with monohydrate of the GI distress or the bloaty feeling.
And you came out with a creatine HCl, right? The sheatine, is that?
I did. What was really funny was I was speaking at a medical conference about creatine, about aging powerfully, building muscle, creatine, and the scientist behind HCl found me afterwards and started talking to me about it. And I kind of was like, yeah, show me the studies. That sounds too good to be true. Show me the studies. And because if you hear out in the world, the popular, the litany is monohydrate's the most studied. And I'm like, no, creatine is it's the thing doing the benefit. That's a carrier. And so as I started to go through all the research, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. So, it's been fantastic because again, I started 2 years ago saying every woman needs to be on creatine. And then I started getting all this pushback.
Right.
And I went, oh my God. And that's what made me aware. It was like tons of people. And I was selling monohydrate and I'm like, and it wasn't everybody. Some people do fine with it. It's like, great, use that. But it was enough. And what's also cool is to be able to use a much lower dose. So yeah, I'm actually doing an entire line of creatine products because I'm so obsessed with creatine, I admit it. But I put together a creatine, taurine, magnesium product because I wanted everything kind of an ATP booster. So ATP being the energy currency of the cell. I wanted something that would really support your body being able to produce energy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so on the protein, knowing how important protein is, do you supplement with any protein or do you get it through whole foods?
So I do two things. I've been using protein powders since I was 30. So I love protein powders. I think they can be a really good supplement. So I tend to use those in the morning and I travel with them. And I also, along with protein powder, I also use collagen. Now, collagen is protein. It's the most abundant protein in our body, but it's not a complete protein like you'll get with, say if you were using whey or pea or one of these other ones. My pea protein is just getting revised now to spike it with a couple of the essential aminos that it's low in. So it will be balanced, like it'll be more similar to whey. But I actually love using a protein powder. However, I think there's a next level to this, and that's essential amino acids. And I'm now at a point in digging into this research that I think that this needs to be a mainstay for people, especially people who are on GLP-1 drugs where their appetite might be lower. These essential amino acids don't trigger satiety, but what they will do is give you those building blocks that you need in not just for muscle protein synthesis, but for carrying hormones, for making neurotransmitters, for building bone, all the different things that you need to do in your body. So I'm a big fan of essential amino acids. Every day I go to the gym with creatine. I'm working on a new creatine hydration product because I've been mixing my hydration product and my creatine and my essential amino acids all together. And that's what I go to the gym with. But I want to make sure I have enough essential amino acids on board because we do about 300 grams of amino acid turnover a day. And, some of it's regenerating, old amino acids, but I want to make sure that I don't have to break down, that I'd rather have an ample supply for my body to use.
And on that, I mean, you talked about one of the benefits of creatine that I think people might not realize is that recovery side and its impact on recovery. And as we're pushing our bodies, that recovery, whether it's via sleep or other recovery modalities is incredibly important. How do you think about that, especially with someone that is having to travel and works out and works as hard as you do?
It's so interesting. Back when I was a trainer, way back when, I used to work out hours every day, hours and hours. And what I've discovered is that really the recovery is where I get all my gains. And when I would find before when I went on vacation or I got sick, I actually got stronger. I was like, okay, but it was so hard it's such a mentality of more is more, right? It's like that worked, I'll do this. So it's one that we really have to look at is you're not building muscle at the gym. You're breaking it down at the gym so that you can rebuild and get stronger. So I look at recovery first, the foundational one obviously is sleep. And just like we don't need less protein as we age due to anabolic resistance, we don't need less sleep as we age either. So we really have to prioritize this. Sleep is a big thing for me. It was tough at Eudaimonia, those late night dinners. I was like, what do you mean we're going to dinner at 8?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny at a conference like that where everybody talks about, Brian Johnson's like, I eat my last meal a day at 11 because it impacts my sleep. But everybody said, don't eat within 3 hours of bed. And then they're taking you to dinner at 8. You're like, how do you reconcile
and your
things?
meal's getting served at 9:30. And I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah. I was like, we didn't need to have dinner. We could have actually just gone out and hung out and been fine. So literally, I eat dinner 2 to 3 hours before bed. I try to make it 3. Sleep is a huge thing for me. The other thing that I really love for recovery is sauna. Love. Hard to travel with the sauna. I've got 2 at home. I have a fast heating one. So in the mornings, what I like to do before I work out is I do my one that fast heats. I'll do 10 minutes of that, and then I'll jump into the cold plunge. But I won't do the cold plunge after I lift weights because you got to wait like 6 to 8 hours. I haven't seen anything conclusive to say how long you really need to wait after you lift weights to cold plunge. So I do it first thing in the morning instead. But you can do sauna after you work out, and it helps with you becoming more. It's anabolic. So
it boosts growth hormone, all that, right? It'll juice everything.
I mean, sauna is one of the greatest. Like you look at the happiest countries in the world that also have the best health, and it's all the spa countries, right? It's Finland and Norway and Iceland. And I remember I was in Iceland and I was staying at this hotel called the Retreat Hotel, one of the top 5 hotel experiences of my life. It's built into the Blue Lagoon, but it's got its own private area. It's got the most amazing spa. You have water massages out in the Blue Lagoon. It's just spectacular. But that's where they had the real cold plunge, the real saunas and steam rooms built into the lava rock. But all of them spa, like every day. They're in the hot thermal spas, getting the silica. Then they're doing, saunas, and they do it all together. And I'm convinced, like, this is where we're messing it up. We just don't do it. It's like a luxury here.
On the sleep side, I mean, you talked about supplementing with magnesium. Do you have anything baked into your routine, any special thing with your bed or eye mask or earplugs, anything to kind of create your environment that you swear by?
So I take magnesium and I have a product called Sleep Candy, basically 5-HTP and melatonin and GABA, and then in inositol. And then at home, I have a Samina bed. It is amazing. Sadly, it doesn't travel with me, but that Samina bed I'm like obsessed with. So that's great. I totally do the violation in that I have 3 small dogs and they all sleep with us. So, but they actually all sleep through the night 95% of the time. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point though. So if we think of someone like Brian Johnson, it's like, hey, the number one thing is don't share your bed. Right. Like this is very controversial, but if you want high quality sleep, et cetera. But to your point, this is about living the life and the connection. And when you were talking about the sauna benefits and they do it together, maybe it's the doing it together is actually a really big part of it. And having those dogs in your bed. So how is
and my husband's there too. Like the dog and I hear this whole thing about sleeping separate for better sleep. And I'm like, no, I'm not missing that whole connection with.
Right. Are you like giving up $10 bills to pick up a quarter, right?
Right.
Like which is more valuable, because that connection, that proximity, that relationship, how that carries it, because we know the value of the connectivity with other human beings. And so how do you think about that? Like, it sounds like, hey, those aren't trade-offs I'm willing to make, right? Back to majoring in the minors
Well,
on some
just
of this
like I'm
stuff.
not willing to make the trade-off of I'm at this event. We get invited to these two amazing dinners, and they're going to start at 8 o'clock at night. And I'm looking at this going, oh man, but I'm thinking, but this is amazing. Like, I'm
Right.
not going to miss it. No, I'm not going to do it. I don't care. I'm going to
Right.
go do it. So, this is why we do these things, so that we can go and stay out too late and eat dinner too late and maybe have a couple drinks. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. That's the other part. I'm like, okay. I remember hearing my buddy Mark Sisson say, I found out that if you have a couple glasses of wine a couple days a week, you might live 6 months shorter overall. He goes, I'll take it. And,
Yeah.
it's like I look at it and go, I love coffee. I think it's a health food personally. I like wine. Sometimes I stay out late. We went and took a whole group of our mastermind members to a 70s dance club and all stayed out late and danced. I think that's good for the soul. Those are the things that make it all fabulous. So this is why we do these things, so that if we're getting a B plus, A minus, we're good. Those people that are getting an A plus, like, looks not fun to me.
Well, and the cost, the time and attention are finite resources. So what you're putting into one bucket, you are going to end up taking away from others. And so you mentioned the mastermind group. Are there other ways that you deliberately cultivate that social connectivity and social connection? Because there's very strong research. Socially isolated older
Mhm.
adults have a 50% higher risk of developing early onset dementia than their more socially connected peers. Like, are there things that you're doing, just like you think about the fitness deliberately, just like you think about the nutrition, that you're doing to cultivate that on the social side?
So I have created a whole community in the health and wellness space of health practitioners and health entrepreneurs that has been getting together for 12 years. And it literally started because I was going to marketing conferences and I wanted to build my business. And none of my friends from the healthcare conferences were there. So we just started getting together. And it has become such a tight group of people. Now there's like the big event will have 500-600 people, but our mastermind, like I had a small little retreat with 30 of our 80 mastermind members this last weekend. We just had the best time. We had a margarita making contest. We were doing teaching line dancing on the pool day, just like total fun stuff. Then I have another group of female founders that we get together. And we all have WhatsApp groups. So we get together a couple times a year and do fun stuff together. Then I every house I have, we build it out so that we can do fun events and parties. Like, we're already planning our big annual holiday party. So I'm always planning stuff. And if I know I'm going somewhere, like I'm going to Austin in a couple of weeks, we have a whole evening planned there with friends. So and I'm going to New York, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm always planning those things to figure out, how we can all get together and have fun. So I'm a big, it's funny. The reality is I'm an introvert, but I really love these, like, putting on events and connecting up people. So I can't really make sense of how an introvert likes to do this, but it's my thing.
Yeah.
Um, but it is
Yeah.
important, gosh, during the pandemic, like, events have now exploded again because we're meant to be together and hang out and have fun and get to know each other.
Yeah. I mean, with all the things you do and your approach, right? That 80/20, and it's for the resilience and building life. Was this a mindset you kind of came out of the box with, or is this something you've cultivated and continue to cultivate over time? Because as I talk to people, like, for me, mindset is very similar to nutrition or fitness. I can't go to an event and, like, oh, my mindset's fixed for the rest of my life. It's a daily practice. It's something I need to work on. How do you approach it?
So I would say in my 20s, I was the most rigid. I was right. This was the way to do it. I was in grad school and doctoral school. I was the one that had to get the A plus, over exercising. Like, I was not just a vegetarian, I was a vegan, and I was all that crazy stuff. At 30, I dropped out of my PhD program because I met this woman who was going to help me become more successful in business, which I always said I didn't care about. And she said, when you turn 30, you will. And she kind of future paced me. So I started studying with her, and it was funny because she said, here I was, I dropped out of PhD program, sold my business, moved across the country to work with her in Florida. And the first thing she did was put a rubber band on my wrist. And she said, now, anytime you have a limiting belief, snap the rubber band. And I go, wait, I thought you were going to teach me how to be successful in business. Like, I just sold my, my training company. Like, are you kidding? And literally for 6 months, this woman trained me in mindset. And it completely changed the trajectory of my life, of my family's life, because I was so indoctrinated, it just was a whole new way. She taught me to manage my environment. Don't look at the news. You are what you read. You are who you hang out with. All of that. My friends changed. Like, that whole thing, I shifted completely into that growth mindset piece, and I never looked back. It just was, it was how I was. It's been interesting. There was a study that came out a couple years ago that showed that people who are positive about aging live 7.5 years longer than people who aren't. And when you look at all of the stuff out there fortunately, I guess the way my feed is on Instagram, I get like all the stuff where the 93-year-old's winning the swimming competition, right? Or like hoisting her body weight in a deadlift. I don't get the stupid the negative aging stuff. But just I'm adopted. My adopted mom growing up, she was just one of those negative people. Like, if it was raining, she's complaining about the rain. If it's sunny, she's complaining that we've got a drought. I'm like, there's no win here, right? And so I had to really get through that. And that happened at 30, because if we're not careful, like, if you're out in the wild, most people are pretty negative. Like, if you look at the news, you would think that we're done as a species.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, so, and thoughts create, and, your perception becomes reality. So I've always been, since the age of 30, living with Kay Smith, I've been very careful about all of that, because I know the power of it, and it's changes everything. And then I did a lot of work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, so that helped too.
Yeah, I'm sure. and like with Joe Dispenza, for example, I have some of his meditations. I do. Do you have any daily or weekly practices through journaling or self-reflection that you do to kind of make sure you stay in that mindset? Not say you got to that place, but how do you make sure you stay there as well?
So first of all, it's who you surround yourself with. So I am surrounded by growth-minded people, which is amazing. I have an amazing coach, mentor, Mary Morrissey, who I think is probably the top transformational female leader in the world. And then I've changed it up. So I was doing Dr. Joe meditations every single morning. And then I thought, now I've gotten into this predictable pattern that he talks about, breaking the habit of being yourself. And I go, now I've gone right into it again, where, we wake up, we go to the bathroom, I weigh myself, I come back, I put my eye mask, I stop it. So I've been really focused on how do I continue to shift, grow, evolve. So lately it's been reading and journaling in the morning. And I'll tell you what I've been reading. It's been fascinating. Mary Morrissey I was talking to her about our mastermind group and some shifts that I wanted to make. And so she had me read Napoleon Hill's Laws of Success. Now, I mean, we've all read Think and Grow Rich. The laws of success are like Think and Grow Rich on steroids. I was like, how did I not know about this? How did I not know? So that's what I've been working through lately. And this summer, I went with her and her son to Concord, Massachusetts, and did all the leadership laws through, Thoreau and Emerson and all the transcendental leaders. It was so cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm going to have to look. I haven't, like you said, the Think and Grow Rich, obviously, but I don't know if I knew the laws of success. So
you can actually go on YouTube and just Google it, and you'll start to, he'll teach you through it.
Okay.
So that was where I started. I just started listening to all the YouTube videos, and I'm like, okay, I need to read it and highlight it and, take notes on it. So,
and I think we've touched on it, and it's a common thread through all of this, but I forgot to ask at the beginning, what are your goals, or is your goal with all this? I mean, you are a true healthspan role model. And what is your objective?
So I was just talking, we are having our annual team meeting this morning. So it's top of mind because we were talking about it. And I said, I want to change the paradigm. Like, so many people fear aging. And it was interesting. I was super excited about my 50th birthday. Like, I had all these plans and goals and all this stuff that for 2 decades, I was going to hit these things by 50. And I hit them all. And then I didn't make new ones, didn't make new plans. And I just started kind of like, because everything was great. So I was like, yeah, but I wasn't living my life by design. It was by default, right? And all of a sudden, it's like I'm 55. And I'm like, oh, 60's coming, 56, 50. And I went, wow, it's time to recalibrate and go, what would I love? Like, what are the goals? And what I found myself doing was I was kind of like dreading, like, to me, 50 was cool. All of a sudden I was like 60, then you're 70. And I was like, what is that? What are you doing here? What if you could be in the best shape of your life at 60 or at 70? What if you could like make the biggest impact in your career at 70 or at 80, and you can't. And so basically what I want to do is shift that whole paradigm, because the reality is we have this amazing group of people in their 70s and 80s that are basically invisible, that have more knowledge, more experience that we could be learning from that we're not. And so I want to be one of those people that as I age, it's like I'm more out there, I'm more powerful, I'm more prolific, right? So I always laugh. It's like, that's going to be my last book. It's like, no, it's not. Jack Canfield's writing books at 80.
Yeah, it's my next book, not the last book.
Right. It's like, let's just look at what more can they do? Like Mary Morrissey, my one of my closest friends and business mentor, made more money at the age of 72 in 1 year than she did in all of her years in business prior to that.
Wow. I mean, even my own grandfather, who was definitely not a health span role model, his best year was when he was 80 or 82. It was his best. He owned his own business, and like that was his best year.
Right. And what if you just thought, oh, I was supposed to retire at 65?
Yeah.
Like, where did that come from? Like, why do people retire? They retire because they hate what they were doing. Right. And, there's so many things that I have to accomplish ahead of me. Like, there's so much more. Feel like I've just been warming up.
This is amazing. And obviously it's been a journey you talked about in your 20s, in your 30s, and kind of piecing it all together, the change in mindset. For someone coming at this not as well-versed in all the steps, and to prevent just feeling overwhelmed and leading to paralysis, where's a place that you would suggest they start if they're just saying, hey, look, this is my first step kind of on this journey. I'm now taking it more seriously.
So, can I do two?
Yes, please. Yeah. Bonus.
So the first one is a question that Mary Morrissey asked that I think is the single best question. And it sounds so simple, but I'll tell you the example. So for my 60th birthday, she gave me a $6,000 check. And she said, you must spend this on something that you would love. So you must ask the question, what would I love? Which sounds so simple. And yet I sat there stumped. I'm like, what would I love? I've got this thing, which I ended up getting a Sprint treadmill. I was like, that's what I would love. The funny part is I got the Sprint treadmill. The company ended up giving me the Sprint treadmill, but I didn't have anywhere to put it. So we had to build an entire addition onto the house. I'm like, be careful. But, just thinking about that question of like, what would I love? And not letting all of the chatter of like, oh, but you couldn't ever do that. Or, you're too old for that. You're not good enough for that. You're not tall enough or whatever the garbage is that we do. It's just, what would I love? And then knowing that whatever it is that you would love, you can't do if you don't have your health. Bottom line, like we've been talking health span, and the reality is, having had a son that nearly died, I understand that quote that he who has his health has 1,000 dreams and he who doesn't has one. It really is. So what's that first step that you can take in your health? And if you aren't getting the 8 steps in a day, well, there's the first one. Like, That's the first one. Got that, then do the protein. Got that, then do the resistance training. And you just build on that foundation of all of these majors, the 80% that are going to really be those big rocks that will give you that great health span so that you can do the what I would love.
You know how we had the health pyramid, like the dietary one, that obviously was terrible, but it seems like a really valuable one, right? Like here, because people, like you said, focus on the molecule or the red light therapy, this, that, and the other, versus the kind of building up from that macros base. Like, what are the real majors?
Right. They go right to the top.
Yeah.
And go, which red light should I get? And I'm like,
JJ, this has been absolutely amazing. I felt privileged already to be able to work out with you, and then now to be able to spend an hour picking your brain, learning from your vast wisdom and experience. Before we sign off, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners, or anything you think they should hear from you?
I think the biggest thing with all of this, because we're probably all podcast connoisseurs and getting hit with all this information all the time, which it's so great to have all this information. But the reality is, if you don't do anything with it, the tree fell in the forest, right? So my big goal with all of this today is that there was something that you heard that you went, oh, I should do that. And get out of the should and get over to that do, So take one thing and put that into action consistently, because doing one thing one time does nothing.
Yeah, I love that. Just pick one. Don't get overwhelmed with all of it. Pick one and actually do it. That's where the impact comes, not from the learning, but from the doing. Yeah. Thank you so much, JJ. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Home of Healthspan podcast. And remember, you can always find the products, practices, and routines mentioned by today's guests, as well as many other Healthspan role models on alively.com. Enjoy a lively day.